estaba en el punto pivotal de la importancia.
Saludos, soy Kiara Pastrana del Buró de Noticias 2018. Durante la Semana de la Prensa, el miércoles 1 de agosto, se presentó el foro Katrina y María, dos catástrofes, similitudes y lecciones. El mismo estuvo a cargo del veterano periodista Jed Horn, editor del periódico Times-Picayune en Nueva Orleans. Hi, welcome to Puerto Rico. How would you describe your experience while covering Katrina in 2005 in New Orleans?
It was extremely chaotic, to say the least. It was also a peak experience for all of us journalists. We ran ourselves ragged, we ruined our health, but we had a powerful time doing it, and we came away with, I think, the respect of our colleagues, which was an important part of the feedback loop that we needed to be engaged with. And at the end of the day, I think it was because the city survived. It was a transformative experience for the city, and it was a transformative experience for the newspaper.
What was your newspaper editorial focus while covering this event?
Well, I was the city editor at the time, and so my job really had to do with managing a staff of reporters who were in the city of New Orleans, which had been shut off by the National Guard. It was essentially quarantined, and there was also a curfew at night. They were in there anyway, doing their job. They were sleeping where they could, getting food how they could. Occasionally I would send somebody in a truck, and they would bring them more food. Heroic work on the part of these 6 or 8 journalists who chose to stay in the city and to report.
And how would you describe the man-provoked disaster of Katrina that caused floods and thousands of deaths? Do you see any difference if you compare it with Puerto Rico disaster?
I think the point of comparison, well, there are 2 points of comparison. One is that if Puerto Rico is not the most important place in the world to Donald Trump, because it is a territory and not a state and so forth, New Orleans similarly was kind of reviled by the Bush administration because we were a Democratic state, had a Democratic governor, a largely black city. They didn't care about us. The similarity is further tightened in the fact, as you mentioned, that it is a man-made disaster. The man-made component in Puerto Rico was PREPA and the collapse of your electrical grid here. The equivalently disastrous man-made part of the Katrina disaster was our canals, or rather our levee system, which encloses the city and which was meant to survive a storm of that intensity, but collapsed. The water came rushing in, the city flooded, and the disaster was the result of the flood, not the storm.
Do you see any difference between the coverage given by the international press and the local press?
There is a difference in perspective, certainly. Often the international press is bearing in mind its own disasters. For example, we had a lot of interaction with the Japanese when they came to New Orleans after Katrina, and that was because they had in Kobe, though it was an earthquake, the damage was very similar, and Kobe even had a jazz culture, so they had a particular interest in New Orleans in seeing how we would survive. They were, of course, concerned about New Orleans, but they were at all times concerned about developing the comparison. And I think that's typical of international media or national media come from a different city to look at a particular disaster.
Thank you for the interview. Reportando Kiara Pastrana y Adnan Escalera en la cámara.